The room fell silent when Ava dropped the folder. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. It was rage. The kind that builds in your bones when you're told to smile while bleeding. On the polished marble floor of the glass conference room, the open folder spilled its contents: quarterly reports, performance reviews, and a single annotated spreadsheet. The numbers didn't lie. But the people in the room did. The CEO, Gregory Shaw, leaned back in his ergonomic leather chair, smirking. "Miss Hart," he said slowly, "I believe this space is reserved for senior leadership. Assistants don't get to interrupt board meetings." Laughter followed, muffled but sharp. Ava felt every gaze like a needle in her skin. She had spent 3 months preparing that report. 3 months discovering that the numbers had been inflated, manipulated, weaponized. And she had traced it back to one name: Gregory Shaw. 15 seconds in, and she was already the villain in the room. "You're not supposed to be here," someone whispered behind her, but Ava didn't flinch. She knelt slowly, picking up the pages. Her voice, calm but firm, cut through the tension. "I have evidence of financial misrepresentation, and I will not be silenced." Gregory's smirk faltered. That was the beginning. Ava Hart had been at Rothbridge & Co. for 18 months. She was a senior analyst in title. Only her department treated her like a glorified intern. She was the one asked to stay late without pay, to clean up PowerPoint decks that VPs messed up, to smile and nod when mail managers interrupted her mid-sentence. The building was modern, open concept, filled with glass and steel, transparent in design, opaque in ethics. From day one, Ava noticed patterns. Promotions handed to less competent men. Projects reassigned without credit. Meetings held in clubs she wasn't invited to. And whispers, always whispers, about who fit the culture and who didn't. Still, Ava endured. She came from a small town where girls were taught to speak softly and say thank you. But her mother had told her something else. Never trust the silence in a room that should be screaming. So Ava watched, and she learned. Rothbridge's numbers were always suspiciously perfect. Quarter after quarter of growth, even when the market was shaky. Clients retained despite internal complaints. Layoffs justified by strategic pivots, while executive bonuses increased. She'd seen too many red flags and buried too many of them for fear of being called paranoid. Until the Talvera account. Talvera Pharmaceuticals was Rothbridge's crown jewel, worth $280 million in advisory fees over 5 years. Ava was asked to audit the model one night at 10 p.m. after everyone else had left. She ran the numbers. They didn't match. There were ghost profits projections labeled as confirmed when the deals weren't signed. And the discrepancy? $43 million. She brought it up to her manager the next morning. He told her with a smile, "It's already been reviewed. Drop it." That was the first real warning. The second came as an email she was never meant to see. A reply from Shaw himself, forwarding her concerns to legal with a short note. "She's digging. Shut it down." But Ava didn't shut it down. She started making copies. Email chains, balance sheets, voice memos. Every late-night whisper of truth she stored on an encrypted drive only she could access. She told no one. Not her best friend Maya, not her roommate, not even her therapist. She pretended to be naive, to smile, to apologize when others stepped on her ideas in meetings. But she was building a case. It took 3 weeks to compile it all. Long nights, early mornings. Pretending not to hear what they called her behind her back. Ice Queen. Know-it-all. Quota higher. And then one morning, the final blow came. Her badge didn't work. Security told her she was on leave, though she'd never requested one. Her email was deactivated. IT wouldn't return her calls. Her nameplate had been removed from her desk. She wasn't fired. She was erased. That night, She stood outside the building in the rain, watching as her replacement, a man 2 years her junior, took credit for a presentation she had built from scratch. She saw him shake hands with Shaw. That's when she knew. They wanted her gone before she could speak. So she walked back into the building the next day with the folder. Not as an employee. As a whistleblower, she waited until the quarterly board meeting. She knew the exact time, the exact room. She didn't ask for permission. She opened the door and walked in like she owned the floor. Because in a way, she did. Her work had built this place. Her silence had protected it long enough. That was what led to the confrontation. Now, back in the moment, Shaw stood up slowly. "You are trespassing," he said coldly. "Security has been called." Ava held up her hand. "Before they arrive, I want you to look at page 3. No one moved. But curiosity is stronger than loyalty when someone smells a scandal. Page 3 showed the internal ledger differences between 2 Talvera reports, one real, one doctored. Page 4 showed Shaw's signature. By page 5, the room was silent again. Someone coughed. A board member, a woman in her 60s, who had once led a university, leaned forward. "If what you're alleging is true, this company is in violation of SEC regulations." Ava nodded. "I have more. Emails, recordings, testimonies. I've already submitted them to an external auditor. This is just the preview." Gregory Shaw looked pale. Ava continued, her voice steady. "I was told I didn't belong in this room, that I was just an assistant, that I should know my place." She looked around at the faces, some ashamed, some impressed, some terrified. "I do know my place now. And it's not beneath anyone. They didn't arrest her. Not that day. Security arrived, yes, but no one dared touch her. Not with a room full of board members sitting in the icy silence of exposure. A few pretended to check their phones. One executive left, visibly sweating. Shaw remained frozen, his mask of power slipping like damp paint in the rain. Ava stood there, soaked not with water, but with conviction. She had waited over a year for this moment, where her voice wasn't dismissed, her facts not buried under condescension. But she didn't gloat. This wasn't revenge. It was revelation. The moment security asked if she would come quietly, Ava simply handed over a slim USB drive. "For the board," she said. "And the press, if you stall." She walked out on her own. Head high, shoulders square. They had taken her badge. She had taken their illusion of invincibility. 2 days later, the company issued a statement. Allegations of accounting inconsistencies are being taken seriously. Standard corporate PR, but the storm had started. An anonymous Dropbox link hit the inboxes of several journalists. Reports, files, recorded meetings. One audio file in particular made its rounds. Gregory Shaw in a closed-door conversation with a senior VP, saying, "No one's going to listen to some junior analyst who still wears ballet flats. She'd burn out or shut up. Either way, she's disposable." It wasn't just sexism. It was strategy. Rotten, institutional strategy. Ava watched the news from her small apartment, where the light bulbs flickered and the Wi-Fi cut out every hour. She wasn't some savior on a white horse. She wasn't trying to burn the company down. She just wanted people to finally see it for what it was, a fortress built on suppression and exploitation, wrapped in glass and equity statements. She wasn't anonymous anymore. Her name had leaked. And with it came the flood. First, there were whispers. Other women from Rothbridge began to reach out ex-employees, current ones still pretending to smile at meetings. They told Ava their stories. Promotions denied. Ideas stolen. HR reports mysteriously vanishing. One assistant said she'd been told to shred a complaint without reading it. "I thought I was crazy," the assistant said over a coffee call. "But you made it real. Then came the letters from men. Not many, but some. Quiet, guilty ones. I saw it happen and said nothing. I didn't think I had the power to challenge it. I'm sorry. They were late, but they were not useless. The board launched an internal investigation. Gregory Shaw was placed on temporary leave. The media began publishing segments on systemic misconduct in elite firms. But Ava knew better than to trust headlines. These institutions didn't fall from accusations. They bent only under the weight of undeniable proof and public shame. She needed something more. Not just a scandal, a reckoning. She turned to an unlikely ally, Marjorie Linfield, the older board member who had spoken up in the meeting. Marjorie had once been the only woman dean in her university's history, later ousted after exposing a donor cover-up. She knew how systems protected themselves. She requested a private meeting with Ava. They met in a library. Not a conference room, not a cafe. Neutral ground. Wooden shelves. Dusty silence. I believe you, Marjorie said, folding her hands. Ava didn't thank her. Not yet. I need access to the board's voting records, Ava replied. I need to prove this isn't just Shaw. It's culture, process, structure. Marjorie raised a brow. You're not afraid of how far this goes? Ava smiled faintly. I'm afraid it doesn't go far enough. With Marjorie's help, Ava uncovered decades of backdoor deals, vote manipulation, and policies intentionally designed to suppress whistleblowing. There were clauses buried in employee contracts that legally gagged staff from speaking out, even when the company acted unethically. There were also names. Women pushed out with severance agreements and NDA clauses. Men promoted for loyalty, not merit. Committees formed purely for image, never action. The corruption wasn't loud. It was efficient. But Ava wasn't alone anymore. With mounting support, a coalition of ex-employees and current insiders began working with a civil litigation firm. They weren't asking for hush money. They were filing suit. A class action lawsuit. Rothbridge and Co. versus the Silenced. When news broke of the suit, Shaw released a pre-recorded statement. He blamed growing pains. He called Ava misguided. He used all the buzzwords, inclusive values, room for learning, diverse future. But the damage had already been done. Ava watched as shareholders demanded audits, as clients withdrew, as talent started to leave the company voluntarily, unwilling to be associated with what Rothbridge had become, or perhaps what it had always been. Then the ultimate blow. Ava stood once more at the entrance of Rothbridge Tower this time, invited. The board had called an emergency meeting. Marjorie greeted her in the lobby. They want to talk, she said. They want you to stop pushing for a full investigation into executive-level cover-ups. They're prepared to offer ... compensation. Ava looked up at the mirrored facade of the building. It didn't feel powerful anymore. It felt hollow. Let them talk, she said. She entered the boardroom not as an assistant, but as a force. Not one person laughed this time. She listened. She nodded. Then, when they finished offering her money, silence, or a leadership position in DEI, Ava spoke clearly. This isn't about me anymore. I won't trade justice for a title. One of them, an older man with a trembling voice, asked. Then, what do you want? She looked each of them in the eye. Structural reform, oversight, whistleblower protection, equitable pay audits. And your resignation, Mr. Shaw. He was sitting at the far end of the room, pale and diminished. He said nothing, but this time no one stood to defend him. The next morning, headlines echoed through newsrooms like a storm that had been brewing behind corporate glass. Rothbridge CEO resigns amid financial scandal and discrimination lawsuit. Whistleblower exposes deep culture of abuse in elite firm. The woman who didn't stay silent. Ava didn't read the articles in full. She didn't need to. The battle wasn't over just because the figurehead had fallen. She had learned that systems don't collapse with a press release. They shift, recalibrate, protect themselves. And if you don't stay alert, they'll rebuild in silence, this time with prettier slogans and more polished lies. But something had changed. This time, people were listening. She was invited to speak at panels, universities, private events hosted by women's leadership forums. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. She declined most invitations. She wasn't a brand. She wasn't an icon. She was tired, and she was still angry. Because for every Ava who made it to the surface, there were dozens still buried, afraid, gagged by policies, NDAs, debts, or threats. Many had families to protect. Others had visas that tied their freedom to abusive jobs. And some had simply been broken beyond words. Ava didn't want applause. She wanted architecture, a blueprint for resistance. So she created one. Together with a small team of volunteers, some from Rothbridge, others from institutions just as corrupt, she founded the Quiet Line, a nonprofit designed to document workplace abuse anonymously, connecting whistleblowers with legal protection and independent investigators. It started with a single phone number, then a website, then a network. Stories poured in like dam water finally cracking. A nurse silenced after reporting malpractice. A junior developer punished for flagging racial bias in AI datasets. A university researcher erased from her own paper by tenured men. A Latina intern who'd been told to lower her voice if she wanted to survive the industry. They didn't want fame. They wanted change. And Ava made sure their stories didn't stay buried. But change has a cost. A few months into the foundation's launch, Ava began receiving threats. Calls with no voice on the other end. Emails that vanished seconds after opening. A man in a dark suit who followed her down the subway stairs and stood just close enough to remind her she wasn't invisible anymore. Not everyone celebrated truth, especially not those who profited from silence. Marjorie warned her. This won't be a clean fight, Ava. You're stirring things that were designed to stay buried. I'm not trying to clean them, Ava replied. I'm trying to disinfect them. So she strengthened her protocols. End-to-end encryption. Legal teams on standby. She learned how to track metadata, how to speak in rooms that didn't want her presence. She trained herself in resilience, in patience, because systems don't just collapse. They get dismantled, one clause at a time. 1 year later, Ava was called back to Rothbridge, not by the board, but by the Federal Compliance Commission. They needed her testimony. The firm was facing full-scale federal charges, Naus-Ek violations, labor law infractions, class action retaliation claims. The investigation had grown far beyond what she had imagined. It was now a precedent-setting case. Ava hesitated. She knew this meant putting her face to the fire again. The opposition had money, influence, entire PR teams whose only job was to smear whistleblowers into irrelevance. But she said yes, not for revenge. For record, in court, she took the stand in a gray blazer. No makeup, no rehearsed lines, just her voice, just the facts. She described the night she found the discrepancy. The silence from leadership, the retaliation, the erasure. She explained the culture, how it wasn't just chaw, but the way the system had rewarded obedience and punished inquiry. How the women and minorities had always been culture fits until they asked too many questions. How HR had been designed not to protect employees, but to shield executives from accountability. The courtroom was quiet. No one interrupted her this time. No one laughed. Afterward, a journalist caught her outside the courthouse. "Do you feel vindicated?" they asked. Ava looked up at the sky. It was gray, sharp with wind. "I feel like I bought oxygen," she said. "Enough to breathe, but we're still underwater." They didn't quote that in the article. It was too quiet to sell. Back home, Ava sat on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by envelopes. Not lawsuits this time. Letters, handwritten ones. Some from women she'd never met. Some from men who admitted they hadn't spoken up when they should have. Some from girls in high school saying they wanted to just like her. She cried at the fifth one. A letter from her mother's old friend, who had worked in the same textile factory for 22 years. She had watched the lawsuit unfold on the news and written, "Your mother would be proud. You didn't just fight back. You made room for others." That was when Ava realized she wasn't fighting to win. She was fighting so others wouldn't have to. But the system hadn't forgotten her. 2 weeks later, Rothbridge & Co. filed for bankruptcy reorganization. Gregory Shaw settled privately no jail time, but millions in restitution. Several executives resigned under scrutiny. The company tried to rebrand under a new name. Different logo. Different mission statement. But the public didn't forget, because Ava had published everything. Not out of spite, out of necessity. She created an open archive of documents, voice memos, policy loopholes. A blueprint for any employee in any institution to recognize when they were being manipulated, silenced, erased. It wasn't flashy. It was powerful. It was permanent. It wasn't long before other institutions felt the ripple. Not just financial firms, but law schools, media agencies, nonprofits, hospitals. The quiet line began receiving reports in dozens of languages. The problems were eerily similar. Different uniforms, same silence. Ava knew she couldn't solve everything. She wasn't naive. But she also knew that the myth of isolation, the lie that you're the only one, was what kept systems alive. So she connected the stories, mapped the patterns. She launched a tool called the Mirror Searchable Index of Anonymized Stories, tagged by sector and violation. Not for spectacle, but for solidarity. So people could see their experience reflected in someone else's truth. And slowly, something changed. People began refusing silence. An executive at a publishing house resigned after an intern's story went viral through the Mirror. A university overturned 3 tenure decisions after Ava's legal team flagged gender-based evaluation discrepancies. A hospital updated its internal whistleblower policy, citing the quiet line as the source. These weren't revolutions, but they were cracks in the armor. And cracks grow. Ava was invited to speak at a leadership conference hosted by a major consulting firm. She almost declined, but something told her to go. The room was everything she remembered: clean suits, sleek power, calculated empathy. But this time she stood on stage. No script, no apology. She looked out at the crowd and said, "You don't have a diversity problem. You have a power problem." There was a pause. And then silence. The kind that used to make her feel small. Now it felt like surrender. After the talk, a young woman approached her. She looked no older than 22, shoulders tense, eyes darting like prey, still unsure if it had escaped the hunter. "I'm still working there," the girl whispered. "They did to me what they did to you. But I don't have what you have." Ava placed her hand gently on the girl's arm. "Yes, you do," she said. "They just haven't heard you yet." She handed the girl a card. The girl clutched it like a lifeline. Because it was. That night, Ava walked alone through the city. No cameras. No articles. Just her breath in the air. She passed the Rothbridge building, now under renovation. New name barely painted over the old letters. She stopped. She didn't feel vindication. She felt grief for what she had lost, for what others had lost in silence, for the brilliance stolen, the ideas smothered, the lives derailed. But she also felt something else, stillness, not peace, but stillness. The kind that follows after something ancient finally exhales. Back in her apartment, Ava sat in the dark. The world hadn't changed, but she had. She had once believed she was powerless, that her voice was too small, her position too insignificant, her pain too personal. But now she knew the truth. Power doesn't live in titles. It lives in those who dare to tell the truth when it's inconvenient, when it's dangerous, when it costs them everything. She opened her laptop, typed a short message to everyone who is told to keep quiet, to everyone who's made to feel small, to everyone who thought no one would believe them. We do. Keep speaking. Keep showing up. This isn't the end. It's the foundation. She hit send, and the message echoed quietly but fiercely into the inboxes of thousands of strangers who are no longer alone. 1 year to the day after the Rothbridge scandal broke, Ava was invited to testify before a National Labor Commission. This time, she walked into the hearing not as a witness to corruption, but as an architect of accountability. The commission chambers were filled with people from every industry: educators, nurses, tech workers, janitors, writers, data analysts. All of them had come to listen, not because Ava was famous, but because she had made it undeniable. The system was not broken. It was built this way. She stood before the panel and said, "The most dangerous thing we do in modern institutions is confuse silence for stability. We reward politeness over principle. We promote those who obey rather than those who question. We talk about integrity, but punish truth when it's inconvenient." She paused. Her voice did not shake. "I'm not here to represent every person who's been shut down, passed over, or quietly removed. But I am here because I refuse to disappear. And I'm asking you to do the same. Not just for me, but for the millions of people who are still whispering into pillows at night, wondering if what happened to them matters. It does. It always did." That testimony sparked more than policy. It sparked courage. Whistleblower protections expanded across industries. Federal audits of diversity washing programs began. NDAs in cases of abuse and discrimination were challenged in court, and in some cases, invalidated altogether. A new movement emerged, not one with slogans and merchandise, but one made of emails, voice notes, quietly forwarded PDFs. It wasn't a revolution made for TV. It was a slow, steady unbuilding. Ava stayed out of the spotlight after that. She didn't need to be the face of it. She had never wanted fame. She wanted freedom, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt trapped behind the glass of institutions that smiled while crushing them. Some nights, she still woke up with her jaw clenched, her fists curled. The trauma didn't vanish just because the truth came out. The fear stayed. So did the caution. But they were no longer in control. What replaced them was something deeper: resolve. She had learned the difference between being fearless and being brave. Fearless people don't survive this. Brave people do it anyway. Years later, Ava was invited to consult on the board of a new company, one that promised ethical leadership, transparency, justice. She declined the seat, but she agreed to meet with the founders. They asked her what one thing they should prioritize above all else. She said, "Make it easy to tell the truth, not just when it flatters you, but when it costs you something." Then she handed them a printout of a policy framework her team had drafted: anonymous feedback systems with real consequences, anti-retaliation clauses enforceable by external watchdogs, independent grievance committees, leadership rotation to prevent entrenchment, emotional labor compensation for those doing equity work. She wasn't building companies. She was building infrastructure for justice, for dignity, for staying human in places designed to strip that away. One morning, Ava received a small envelope, no return address. Inside was a note, handwritten in neat, careful script. I didn't end my life because of you. I didn't resign because of you. I spoke up because of you. They listened. Thank you for proving that silence is not strength. She sat with the letter for a long time. No tears, just stillness, and the quiet knowing that she had done what many had told her was impossible. She hadn't burned everything down. She had forced the system to see itself and change. The final truth? Ava had never wanted to be exceptional. She had wanted to be heard. And once she was, she didn't use that power to rise alone. She built ladders for others. She handed out keys. She made sure that when the next person knocked, the doors would not stay shut. And somewhere, in a cold room inside another powerful building, a young woman looks down at her trembling hands, holding evidence she was told to hide. She looks up at the ceiling, takes a deep breath, and hits send. Because she knows now, someone out there will believe her. Because someone already did it first, and didn't disappear